Our EP had been out for about a year, and we just wanted to get back into the studio as soon as possible. And we've been hearing great stuff coming from Kevin Kumetz, and we really just wanted to get in there and record stuff with Kevin. So we booked it in probably June or July. After we've been writing for a little bit, we booked some studio time in January with Kevin.
Working with Kevin Kumetz was very easygoing, very low tension, which a lot of the time you'd think going into a studio that the producer or the engineer would be very demanding and possibly pretty high-strung.
Some people think that professional means that, I'm going to get the best take out of you, no matter what it takes, and, how many times I have to yell at you and, push you until you get frustrated.
But Kevin is one of the most docile people you could ever meet. And he's very laid back about everything. He approaches it very professionally.
Professionalism is not just about that or type of equipment. It's about how you can handle the clients that you bring into your studio. And I think that's one of Kevin's greatest strengths, is that he can really get the best out of you without bringing any stress into it at all.
Even when you do something wrong, he's honest, but he tells you delicately. Which it's nice because
he's never insulting you or telling you how horrible the take you just did is, but he's still honest about it, and he won't let crappy takes slide. And he's got a great way of just pushing you to do the best without hurting your feelings at all, and giving you the confidence that you will get the take as long as you keep trying.
When you're recording an album, you really need to be comfortable in the studio. And you can even tell on like some smaller bands, like they get into a studio and they're only there for a couple days. And especially with the drums, like you can just tell the drummer's not comfortable because certain parts sound very mechanical and stuff.
Kevin Kumetz's studio is just, as a physical environment, is just super like stress-free.
Recording with Kevin Kumetz was a great experience for many reasons, because A, he has a really, really cool studio. B, he's on top of his stuff. And C, he has Nintendo 64. And with Nintendo 64, he has Star Fox 64.
There's all these video games from our past, N64, Sega Genesis, and then there's some more modern PlayStation 3, and just a large assortment of games, which I think we probably wasted maybe too much time doing in the studio.
I personally made it a vendetta to defeat Andros and the scum that he associates himself with. This was a very personal endeavor for me. It was very heart-wrenching and tolling on me. But I did it, and I saved the galaxy 3 or 4 times. And we made it our civic duty to try to beat any game we possibly could.
But it was just helpful for, instead of everyone just sitting around while everyone else was doing takes and just doing nothing but listening, to be able to, take a break for a few minutes and be like, let me get a game of, Sonic the Hedgehog in while I'm listening to these takes. And it took away a lot of the stress that goes with being in the studio, and I think it'll make for a better product.
So many people listen to heavy music and they say, oh, I want to become a drummer. So they get their set and they just learn how to do really fast double bass and how to blast beat. And their style never really progresses from there. It's just very flashy, very fast, very simple in that way. But playing in a high school jazz band with Steve, I know he's trained how to drum, in a more classical sense.
I think one of Steve's greatest strengths is his got this terrible aversion to parts that are generic or cliche. I think his most used phrase when writing with him is, that's so generic or that's so cliche.
When he writes his beats and his fills, he approaches it in a much more mature way than just wanting to be fast and flashy and loud.
Steve's, for me, his biggest talent as a drummer is his ability to take your recommendations and then turn them into his own drum parts, so that it might be based off of an idea or a suggestion from someone else in the band.
There would be so many times when we would come to him with a part that we had just written on piano or guitar, and we'd be like, oh, well, just do some double bass or play boop ba boop ba, and he would just be like, that's so cliche, no. And then, he would sit down and take the time to figure out a part that, worked equally well with that, but wasn't what other bands had already done a million times before when faced with that type of situation.
Steve has such an ability to work with us and just understand what we want and bring new things to the table himself.
When Steve writes his drum parts, it's his drum parts, and it's something that utilizes his particular playing style.
I think one of the oddest but also the coolest drum part on the album comes in the song Come Close. And it comes when, after a long section of just like really building up to this really, punk beat, and it ends up going to this part where Steve is going between the hi-hat and the crash and, back and forth in this sort of like almost trancey, like ska type of beat, which is just, it's so unexpected and out of left field. And you would think, given the genres that it's imitating, between trance and electronica and ska, that weird feel, you would think that it would end up being like a really soft part on the album, but it ends up being one of the more brutal parts in that song, which is just so strange, but it was just so cool. And every time we play that song live or when we were recording it in the studio, I just couldn't help but move along to it.
When we were in the studio, something that was really a really scary event that took place was one day.
We got a full day of recording in, and it was really great. Everything was sounding so good.
Steve goes over to unplug one of the computers that we had been broadcasting from,
And he accidentally unplugged the hard drive.
With all of our information on it and all the other bands that Kevin had been recording at the time.
He just turned to Kevin and said, "Is that bad?" And Kevin said,
"Dude, that's like really bad." And we had to start the entire computer over, and we kept our fingers crossed that Steve had not ruined this entire project.
He immediately plugged it right back in, and we set about trying to recover all the files that possibly could have been lost forever. And luckily, by the grace of God, everything was saved.
Everyone else seemed to be really, really shocked and disappointed with Steve. Like, they had no idea it was going to happen, but knowing Steve longer than everyone else had, I expected it and had the opportunity to just kind of stand there and shake my head like, oh, Steve's done it again, because he, with every aspect of his life, he seems to find a way to unplug the hard drive.
I didn't unplug the hard drive, okay? It was Evan. He's an idiot. Don't listen to him. Give up.
This was your doing! This was your destiny! This was all your doing!